To see a city that's usually always like quite buzzing and vibrant, and the streets would just be empty, and it's quite an eerie feeling. We've been closed since March last year, so it's quite a long time.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Although we've experienced lockdowns in Australia, everyday life has been relatively normal compared to countries abroad. Some have been in lockdown for months, and some restaurants globally have had their doors shut for over a year. With so many Australian hospitality professionals abroad, many have either had to wait until an opportunity arises to come home or had lots of downtime to consider their future. What impact is this having on the creative and busy minds of those that star in food landscapes all over the globe? Hanz Gueco is the head chef of Verjus in Paris. Hanz, how are you going?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
It's good to catch up with you. What's it like there at the moment in Paris?
We're in, I don't know, this kind of limbo of waiting for vaccines and kind of the end of the tether of people's patience with lockdowns, and yeah, it's kind of a strange time, but it's nice. It's spring's coming, the sun's out, so can't complain on that side.
Well, in Australia we have random small sort of lockdowns that might last for a matter of days, but it's generally life as normal compared to what we're seeing overseas. What's the last year and a half been like in Paris? Give us an idea of what the lockdowns and the impact that it's had.
It's just been, to see a city that's usually always like quite buzzing and vibrant, and to just walk around. I remember the first couple of months last year where you would just walk around to go to the shops to go buy food or something, and the streets would just be empty, and you normally think of these places where it's just bustling, and it's quite an eerie feeling in the beginning.
You're the head chef at Verjus. What's been the impact of that restaurant in your role?
We've been closed since March last year, so
wow,
it's quite a long time.
Tell us about what impact that's had on you and what you've been doing in that time.
I often try to think of like the positives to it. Because what can you do? It's kind of like forced closures. So I've taken this year as kind of a sabbatical and tried to do interesting things or different things. I was always many years ago I read about this designer, Stefan Sagmeister, and he would his design firm would close once every 7 years to just pursue other things and then come back and just be guns blazing. And I always thought, oh wow, wouldn't that be cool? And it's very unfortunate, but luckily I've had this time to actually have that 1 year of just do whatever you want inside confined spaces.
What sort of impact has that had on your perceptions of what your career is and your cooking? Has it changed the way that you see your role as a chef?
Yes and no. I often speak to people and they've kind of, I don't know if you've got it from your podcast, but people rethink it and kind of mellow out. But I don't know, for me, it's the fire is still really burning for getting back into restaurants and doing what I love. I've enjoyed this last year for the most part, but I can't wait to get back.
Well, I think we should dissect what you're doing over there and have a look at Verjus and your impact a little bit later. But let's go back to the early days. You grew up in Blacktown in Sydney. What was food like in your family?
It was mostly Filipino food because I was born in the Philippines. We would have uh, Chinese food on the weekends. It's just basic kind of food like that. So, um, I'm cooking very, very different things right now. So it's. I wouldn't say I would have a deep connection to what I'm doing now to what I was doing when I was younger. So it's just very. I don't know if that's a very chefy kind of spiel.
Well, what led you to a career in hospitality?
I just when I was younger, I would just love and adore watching all the old cooking programs. I'm here in France, and I reckon a lot of it has to do with watching. Do you ever watch that Rick Stein where he takes that barge and he goes all across France on a canal and cooks different things, and you just fall in love with like, exploring the world, and this is like a great way to do it.
Well, your career has traversed the whole globe. In Australia, you worked at some pretty incredible restaurants. Tell us about the really pivotal moments and the chefs that you worked with and what impact they had on you in Australia.
Right. Well, I started my career at Mark. That was where I started my apprenticeship. Um, I would often think that that was the most important place that I probably worked at. I often say it's the restaurant that most enriched and ruined my life at the same time. Because you learn so much and you have a completely different outlook on food, but at the same time, it's like a very taxing kind of way of thinking about it, of approaching it.
There's been some incredible alumni come out of that restaurant, and it was obviously run by Mark Best, and Pasi Patanen was there as well. What sort of impact did both of those chefs have on you?
Oh, immense. I mean, I ended up becoming Pasi's sous chef when he opened up Cafe Pasi. Um, those two people, they're so they're so demanding of like they always want more from you, and I think that's why so many people have come out of it and done well, because I think they just I don't know. I often think that they instilled like a healthy or unhealthy amount of doubt, so that you're always trying to become better.
What sort of impact did that have on your cooking, do you think?
Like I think you always, if you work somewhere like there, you always want to be more creative or try to think of a way to do what everyone else to not do what everyone else is doing. So yeah, you always think of just like how to be a little bit different.
You also worked at Rockpool and Est. Um, tell us about the food of that time when you're in Australia. Is there any sort of dishes or sort of moments that you can tell us about that really struck a chord with you as a chef?
Yeah, I mean, these are like places you kind of like Rockpool. It's so multicultural. There's so much influences from a lot of different places, and same with Est as well. You kind of take it for granted when you travel overseas, and it feels like such a stretch for them to do things that you do back home, and it's just like so freeing. So you would just see like the use of exo sauce in like a dish where it kind of just lifts everything around it, and but not in a not necessarily like Chinese focused dish. So you think that there's like, you combine this with other influences and you just come up with your own like spin.
You've cooked all over the globe, and we can dive into that shortly. But with that experience, that global sort of experience that you have, how do you see Australian cuisine now, having sort of chefed all over the world?
In its current state, I mean, it's amazing. Like, I think like pound for pound, Australian restaurants are so good. Um, like to travel around and go to different restaurants and see that there's like brigades of 30 people, and you think, well, there's like restaurants just like this in Sydney, and there's like 6 people that run it, and it's just by like pure what's the word? Just constraints where you just have to kind of like there's a lot of like hustling needed, I think, in Australian dining.
You have worked all over the globe. Give us a sense of the experiences you've had and how different the kitchens are working away from Australia.
Well, I mean, when I was younger, I did some stages in the US in a restaurant called Manresa. I also did another stage in Tokyo in this small Japanese restaurant called Ryugen, which was quite intense. And then I went off to Europe, and I was working in Singapore for a little bit. It's a lot of different places.
How different is it compared to working in the Australian hospitality sector?
Oh, I mean, so different. I mean, Japan was like no one barely spoke English, and the kitchens were run very differently to pretty much anywhere else I've worked. So those are quite cultural shock moments. But compared to Australian, I don't know. I mean, I think they're all kind of the same. I mean, I often think you could be anywhere. If you're in the kitchen, you could travel around the world. But honestly, if you're inside there for 60, 80 hours a week, you could be anywhere in the world. It doesn't really matter.
Well, you're in France now. How did you end up there? What drew you to the role that you have there?
I've always wanted to go, and a lot of the chefs I've worked for, Parsi, Mark, Peter Doyle, Phil Wood, they've all been kind of Francophiles, and I don't know if that's an influence or I was drawn to them for this kind of reason, but there are always people that it's always the place where I've wanted to at least see or explore.
And so how did the role at Verjus come about?
Well, I was working at a place called Saturn, and it was like right at the end of my working holiday visa, and I was expecting to go home. And I was approached by the owner and showed me around the restaurant. If you ever been or will go, it's quite a beautiful restaurant. It's in the middle of just a passage, and it's there's vines growing from it's quite a romantic restaurant in the first, right next to the Palais Royal, and it's a small restaurant. It's open Monday to Friday. We're only open dinner service, and we do one menu for 30 to 60 people. So, it's quite an idyllic situation.
Tell us about your style of cooking and what you've been doing there.
I would say it's leaning towards French food. I know it's a big stretch from someone from Blacktown, grew up in Australia, Asian origin, cooking French food in France. But for me, I don't know, it just feels right. I like to take influences from there and try to put it through the lens of like someone else. In the same way that I think like Pasi is very creative because he's someone from Finland looking at food from Australia going, oh, okay, this is what it is. And then it comes out completely different to what you think or what you expect.
Can you give us an example of a couple of dishes to really exemplify what you're doing there?
Okay, so I mean, right before we were making just macaroons. You know, it's like quite a iconic um, French pastry or dessert. And I also wanted to make ones that were without nuts, so everyone could have them, and you wouldn't get these dietary things. So we were exploring like almost every single like different dried product you could make, and we there were a few like winners. Like some we made with polenta instead of almonds, and we filled it with corn and white chocolate, and they were just so delicious. And others we made with pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds and cocoa nibs, and we would always fill them with the same kind of theme in the middle. And I think it's just these like very like subtle changes that I would say would be like things I felt really good when they would go out. You know, like nothing groundbreaking, but you know.
Australia's renowned for amazing produce, but what's it like there where you are? Is the sourcing produce different, and the produce that you're working with, is it quite different to what you're used to in Australia?
Australian produce is nice. I would say that France is, especially with things like vegetables and dairy, it's like number one. It would be world class, and it's the thing is like if let's say you go to Japan, you can buy like the greatest ingredients ever, but they're so expensive. And I think here there's like amazing strawberries or amazing uh, milk and cheese, and it's like at a really accessible price for all the restaurants. I mean, or even for even consumers to buy for themselves at the markets. Um, and there's also the ingredients that you, when you started cooking, you would always dream about, but you could never really get in huge quantities, like ceps and morels and truffles and foie gras. I mean, like here you can get foie gras, and it comes in and it's still warm from yeah, you know, and it hasn't been in a Cryovac bag or something like that. It's just, yeah.
Well, with this access to ingredients like that, how has it changed your cooking in your time there?
Yeah, no, it's definitely changed. I mean, you, you know, often it's like the cliche of letting the ingredients speak for themselves. And to be honest, I understood it, but I never really connected with me. And then you go here and you go eat at like restaurants like La Pege, and it's just like, I don't know, it would be like a beetroot cooked in salt with some balsamic vinegar. And you're like, from afar, you think that even hearing it, even me saying it, it sounds like a joke to think, oh, wow, that would be amazing. But then you go there and you're like, okay, I get it.
I know that you've been experiencing lockdowns and your restaurant has been closed for a year, but while you've been living there, what do you do on your days off in Paris? Where do you like to eat? Can you give us a sense of the experience of the city that you've had?
Well, I mean, since I've lived here, it's 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 very lucky because the places I've worked at have been closed on weekends. So it's quite a strange experience being a chef, but not quite living chef hours, and having like friends and things like this outside of the industry. So yeah, so it's great to I don't know. It's great to eat at different restaurants. My favorite restaurants, I would say, yeah, Bistro Paubert. I mean, I love, as I said, La Pege. Clamato is another favorite.
You're so far from home, and it's been quite a while since you've been back in Australia. What's it been like for you, given the last year and a half with all the lockdowns and being so far from family? What sort of impact has that had?
Yeah, it's been tough. I think that's the hardest part. But you kind of take solace in that the people that you love are in kind of Australia where it still feels very. So you feel very fortunate that you know though you're not there, everything is okay. So I mean, you just got to be strong in those kind of aspects.
You mentioned that everyone's getting a bit sort of sick of the lockdowns and looking forward to society opening up again. Is there any sense of when restaurants might, or your restaurant might open up again and you can get back on the pans?
I honestly, I've kind of stopped paying attention to that a little bit because it's always like, oh yeah, it's 3 months, and then it's there, and it's always like a month later. The consensus now is that restaurants with terraces will open up next month, and maybe restaurants without terraces, like ourselves, will open up in the next 2 months or 3 months. But who knows? I heard the goal for the vaccines was around September, so I guess we'll have to wait till then.
Has it got you thinking about cooking again and what you might do when the restaurant opens up again?
Yeah, I mean, for me, in the very beginning, I would every morning spend like at least an hour just looking at the produce list, and I would write menus for that would have the menus that would have been,
Wow.
and I ended up with hundreds and hundreds of dishes. So that's always been a constant. So now it just feels like I'm like not sitting on lottery tickets, but I'm ready to go when we start back up again.
If it does happen in the next couple of months, what's it going to feel like when you get to be with the team again and start cooking and having guests come through the door?
I don't know. I mean, it's always tough when you come back from like a vacation or a long break to start working again. But it like once you get that rhythm and that flow going, I think it'll feel good again.
During this time off, have you been cooking a lot at home and then cooking differently?
Yeah, a lot of cooking at home. Differently, yeah. I mean, home cooking is so different to restaurant cooking. It's quite nice to kind of do the thing that made you fall in love with it in the beginning. Do you know what I mean?
Well, tell us what do you love about cooking?
No, because I mean, before I wanted, I would cook a lot at home, and then you start cooking and you never really cook at home, and now you've kind of like gone back to what you originally liked about it.
Well, tell us about that. What is it that you love about cooking?
For me, it's the joy of transformation. I feel like I get the same amount of joy of when I open that oven and the cake's fully risen as I did since day one. Like it's the same like amount of satisfaction that I get. And I think that's like what's continued me to keep with this industry or this business.
Well, hopefully the news is good soon, and as the vaccine sort of comes in September, as you mentioned, you guys can open up and you can get back on the pans and do what you'd love to do. Hanz, would love having you on Deep in the Weeds. Good luck over there. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you so much.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.